Hello, troublemakers. Welcome to this week's episode of Resolved Labor Podcast. I am your host, Lynn Fields. This week, we will be highlighting Crystal Lee Sutton. Crystal Lee Sutton was born December 31st, 1940. A Christmas baby. Shout out to the Capricorns. Her parents were Albert Joe and Odell Sutton. She was born in Roanoke Rapids, North Carolina. Now, Roanoke Rapids was first settled as a mill town. So just a little history. A mill town is basically a community developed around a certain factory or a mill. And Roanoke Rapids was a textile mill town. Its largest employer at the time was the J.P. Stevens and Company Mill. J.P. Stevens is one of the oldest family-run businesses in America. They started with one small plant in Andover, Massachusetts, and its founder was a man named Nathaniel Stevens. And when he was 26 years old, while he was, he was courting his wife, he would spend time talking to his future father-in-law, who was a owner of a successful mill, a grist mill. And he convinced his father-in-law to change his grist mill over into a wool mill. The business boomed during the war, and then the venture, it paid off. So, and this, they became so successful that, JP, he eventually, was able to own stock in a gunpowder factory, banks, insurance companies, other mills, railroads, and water power associations. So this guy was like the Elon Musk of the time. He was famous for keeping the family involved in the business. They did not like outsiders. And to this day, the family members, run the business. So troublemakers, when we, say outsiders, of course, this means us, this means the unions, because, the Stevens Company, they believe, they looked at anybody outside of actual, literal family. They view them as outsiders and a third party. And they are on record as saying, quote, a third party serves no purpose, and that they would, quote, they usually, quote, disrupt the usually fine relations the company has with its employees. Now, although the Stevens Company started up north in Massachusetts, of course, over time they expanded down south. And down south included North Carolina. And Crystal's family had been working at one of the 7 Stevens mills in Roanoke for about 3 generations. Crystal was the first in her family to actually graduate high school. She managed to do this, while working the 4 p.m. to 12 a.m. shift at Stevens. Now, mind you, she's in high school at 17 years old, working 4 to midnight. So she started working there at 17, and she remembers on her first day that there was so much noise and dust from the lint in the air that she cried because she couldn't hear. She says she was so congested and stopped up with lint that the workers, they would eat their dinner and their meals in the bathroom because it was quieter in there and they could actually have a conversation, and they didn't have to worry about eating the lint that was in the air. So now, not just the lint in the air and all the noise pollution that was going on, that, in addition to these miserable working conditions, you had a lot of workers that were always getting hurt. Some would lose fingers, working on the different machines. And, of course, JP, the mill, they weren't paying, very good wages for all of this. Now, Crystal wanted to go to the military, but, I don't know why she didn't, but she just stayed in town, and she got married at the age of 19 and had her first son, Mark. And then her husband dies in a car accident. I couldn't really find out if maybe she was pregnant already, again with her second child, when her husband died, or if she just had a second baby daddy. But after her husband died, she has a second son. And at the age of 22, she had Jay. And Jay was born out of wedlock. So I don't know if that means she had a baby daddy, or maybe she was pregnant at 22 and then her husband died. I don't know. But either way, now she's a single mom of Mark and Jay. So at some point, Crystal gets, remarried. So now she's married. She has these two boys. And by 1972, she had been bouncing back and forth between waitressing jobs and sewing jobs. And eventually she just found herself back at the Stevens meals. So Crystal finds herself back at the meal, folding gift towel sets for about $2.65 an hour. She had been on the job for about 5 months when she saw a flyer about a union meeting. Now, the Textile Workers Union of America has sent an organizer named Eli Zifokovich, Zikovich to the area to unionize the meal. Now, the meeting was held in a small black church. Crystal stood out because not only was she one of the very few whites at the meeting, Crystal was one of only two white women there. So this caught Eli's eye. And Eli actually, he reported back to the union that the largest obstacle for organizing in that area was the lack of white interest in the union. So he kind of handpicked Crystal, and told her, look, the only way this union is going to get here is if you get more white folks involved. Like, black people already had bought into the union, but the whites in that area, they had not. So Crystal, she drank the Kool-Aid real fast, like as far as the union. She came to work the next day, after that first union meeting, she had a 5-inch union button on. And she said that like some of her coworkers were like, I know this girl not organizing out loud. And she said the bosses, they kind of lost their shit about it because they could not believe that she was doing this. But she said, hey, somebody had to start it. Most of the organizing that was done, it was done in the community, right? Through actions called, quote, house calling. So house calling is when, people would go to each other's house and they would kind of talk up the union at each other's houses in person, not so much at work because, you don't want the bosses hearing everything that you guys are saying. But Crystal, like I said, she's organizing. She's saying the quiet part out loud. She is wearing this button, even though she says that some of her coworkers kind of treated her like she had the plague sometimes. But, she just kept going at it. Now, y'all know what happened next. Wearing this damn button, this kind of made Crystal a target. So she started getting called into the office like all the time, just arbitrarily for just dumb shit. Like, one of the things she got called into the office for was, hey, Crystal, you are talking too much. And then another time she got called into the office for standing in the bathroom too much. And every time she got called into the supervisor's office, Crystal would bust out this book that Eli had given her. And the book was called What the Company Will Do for You. The pages were blank. And so Crystal used this book to document every encounter with her bosses. So this pissed them off to no end. She said they could not believe I was doing this. Crystal's activism, it even inspired some of her coworkers. Like one of her former coworkers, a lady named Beverly Riggs, she recalls that she would stay home with the children and her husband, Rylan, he was supposed to go to the union meetings and then come back and tell her, hey, what happened at the meeting. But she said that she kind of got frustrated because y'all know, like, I hate to say it, y'all, but sometimes men are not the best at relaying information. And Beverly was like, you know what? I'm tired of getting this half-ass information from you, Rylan. So at some point she started packing up the kids and they all went as a family to the union meetings. And y'all know what happened. Beverly eventually got more involved in the union than her husband did. So guys, just to, pause here for a second and just give credit to the folks that were actually trying to, organize this union because, they got a lot of stuff against them. You have to remember that, this meal is a generational employer. Crystal's grandparents, as well as her parents, her siblings, they were all working at this plant. This is the Stevens Mill. They owned, according to Crystal, they owned every shotgun house in this town. And she says that, the children that would come up behind their parents and grandparents, they learned resignation and just acceptance of how Stevens was treating them, because they would come home and just say things like, ooh, today drained me. The meal got their money's worth today. Like shit like that. So it was never a pushback. It was just more of, well, that's just the work. That's just how we feel when we get off work. No kind of talk about making the conditions better. Now, in 1973, management at the mill put up a 4-page letter, basically, shitting on the union. And the letter basically said to the workers that the union dues would be used to support a Black Power movement that would take over the mill and eventually the town. So when Eli got word about this letter, he was like, I need a copy of that letter. And of course, management refused to give the copy of the letter to the union or to the workers. So what Crystal and her other, organizing friends, they said, okay, I'm going to go and try to memorize a paragraph, and then you memorize a paragraph, and then we're going to come together into the bathroom and we're going to try to write down this letter verbatim and copy it. But y'all already know what happened. That plan is kind of like playing telephone. So when they did get together, the words were all fucked up. They was like, you know what? This is the worst plan that we ever came up with, and we are never going to memorize this letter. So one day, Crystal, when everybody went to lunch, Crystal decides that, okay, nobody's around. I am going to copy this letter. So she took out her little notebook and she starts writing down the letter. So her doing this caught the attention of one of the supervisors named Mason Lee. So he goes over there and he was like, Crystal, knock that shit off right now. Give me that letter. And Crystal, the story goes that she looks at him and she goes, well, Mr. Lee, I didn't even know you knew my name. And so she kept writing and he was like, give me the fucking paper. And so she was like, you know what I'm finna do? Not only am I not gonna give you this paper, I'm finna finish writing this letter and then I'm finna go eat dinner. So Crystal finished writing the letter, copying the letter right there in his face, all 4 pages. And I'm just wondering, like, did he stand there and just keep watching her, or did he go to his office and get pissed off? But either way, it's just kind of funny knowing that she just still sitting here writing this letter, right? So she goes to lunch or dinner and she comes back to her, to her workspace, and she gets called to the office.
Hey, this is Judy Ansell from the Heartland Labor Forum. We're radio that talks back to the boss, and we're proud to be part of the Labor Radio Podcast Network with more than 200 labor radio shows and podcasts from across the country and around the world. The Labor Radio Podcast Network, where working people speak. Find us at laborradionetwork.org.
So troublemakers, Crystal gets called into the office. And of course, the supervisor, he starts ranting and raving not about Crystal writing this letter. Like that's not what he was ranting and raving about. He starts ranting and raving that Crystal was insubordinate because she was using the payphone when it wasn't her break time. So he gave her a handwritten discharge letter. And guys, if troublemakers, I found this discharge letter online. And it said, this employee reportedly disobeyed several instructions and was insubordinate and misconducted herself and was discharged. And then it says, was individual told why discharged? And then there's an X next to the word yes. So yeah, I guess this is how they fired people. Back in the day, they just gave you a piece of legal paper saying insubordination. But this is the shit that happens before you get a union. So of course, Crystal's not giving this ranting and raving any kind of energy. And he, of course, escalates, gets pissed off, yells at her to leave his office. So Crystal, she was like, all right, cool. But, I need to go back to my workstation and get my purse. So by this time, the chief of police is there and security is there, because this is what punk ass managers do. Okay. They call the authorities. So Crystal, they're escorting her to her workspace. And when she gets there, she grabs this marker and a piece of cardboard and she writes the word union in big ass letters, and she climbs on top of her workspace and she just stands there holding this sign above her head that says union. And she's turning and she's making eye contact with all of her coworkers. And eventually each coworker, like when she would make contact with them, they turned off their machine and held up the V for victory sign in solidarity with her. And eventually the entire factory went silent. And, of course, the supervisors, they were like, okay, get your ass down, because now, that's the one thing I love. I love to see managers uncomfortable. So they was like, okay, get down, and they yelled at her, and she stayed up there for a few more minutes, but eventually she did get down and she was arrested. I guess, I don't know what the charge was, but she was arrested, and of course she was fired. So this happened in 1973. And of course, Crystal filed an unfair labor practice. And in 1974, the union, the mill actually voted the union in. And out of 3,100 employees, they won it by a very slim margin. I'm talking about there was only a difference of 237 votes for the union out of 3,000 workers. And, in that time, so by the way, just to let y'all know, between 1963 and 1973, because y'all know Stevens wasn't going down without a fight, they amassed 21 labor law violations and paid $1.3 million in back wages to the hundreds of employees that they have fired over the years, because they were trying to organize a union. Now, in 1974, like I said, the union did, come to the plant, but that doesn't mean that Stevens automatically started recognizing them, just like employers are doing today. So in 1975, a reporter named Henry Lieferman, he writes a book about Crystal, and the book is called Crystal Lee, A Woman of Inheritance. And in 1978, Crystal won her job back, and she got $13,000 in back pay. But when she got back to work, she said, there was no organizer there to greet her. There was no press. There was no nothing. And in fact, Crystal says that when she first got fired after, holding that sign above her head and everything, it wasn't all hunky dory. The union wasn't immediately on her side. She said that they were actually acting like, they did not approve of her actions, and that they had, they didn't want anything to do with her. And as a matter of fact, when Crystal got back, to her job, there was a new organizer on the scene, and he said he didn't even know who she was. Crystal says that the energy was off, and, nobody from the regional office, like I said, was there to celebrate her return. So she took her accumulated, union negotiated 2 sick days, and she left and never came back to the factory. That same year, Hollywood came knocking, and they decided to adapt. You remember that Crystal Lee book? So they decided to adapt it into a movie. And when Crystal read the script, she had concerns about, the historical accuracies, because y'all know how Hollywood does. Hollywood gone Hollywood, and they like to romanticize different things, twist shit up, make 2 people that did something into 1 person. Crystal didn't like that. So she pressed for approval rights over the script, and she was denied. So she refused to allow the producers to use her name. And in the midst of all of this, troublemakers, I forgot to tell y'all, while Crystal was doing all this union organizing and shit, it also caused a divorce in her second marriage. So she sued, the movie company, and she got a small settlement, but it was not enough to make her rich or anything. They just settled with her to use the likeness of her story. And, she just moved on with her life. She moved out of the area. She got remarried to a guy named Larry Sutton, and they had a 3rd son, and in 1979, the movie Norma Ray premiered at the Cannes Film Festival. And the lead actress was an actress named Sally Field. So I'm just going to give y'all a little bit of tea here, guys. So Sally Field is, a big time actress at the time. She gets cast in this movie. Now, Sally is dating another actor by the name of Burt Reynolds. Y'all know these people, right? So Burt Reynolds, this movie came out at Cannes and it was getting a lot of like high press. People were really, really, excited about it. People were not Burt. Burt was not people, okay? And, when it was time for him to go to the award ceremony, like Sally says that Burt even told her, "You don't think you're going to win anything, do you?" Because he didn't like the movie. He thought it was dumb. He wasn't appreciating all of the accolades that Sally was getting. And he actually did not escort her to the film festival, which she was up for an award for Best Actress at that time. And she actually won. The movie was a huge success, and of course, she even won an Oscar for this portrayal of the movie, for her portrayal of Crystal in the movie. And this made, folks start seeking out the real Norma Ray. And when the movie came out, they were really surprised to see how humble and how poorly she was living at the time, because when they found her, she was working at a fast food restaurant pulling fat off of frozen chickens. And this is a job that Crystal describes as the worst job she's ever had in her life. And remember, the job she came from, she was literally eating fucking lint. And she said this was worse than that. So, of course, with the success of the movie, the union came back like, "Girl, we love you. Like, take us back," because the last thing the union needs is bad press. Like, it's like, okay, this girl did all this for y'all and y'all turned around and she pulling fat off frozen chickens. Like, what happened with that? So the union and Crystal made amends and they gave her a proper job as an organizer for the now Amalgamated Clothing and Textiles Workers Union. Crystal went on a speaking tour as, quote, "the real Norma Ray." She was even the keynote speaker at the very first Labor Notes conference. Labor Notes, shameless plug, it is a union conference held every other year in Chicago. I hope to see you there. Now, with the release of this movie, y'all know we Americans, we finna go start looking out the real people. And not only did the union need to clean up their reputation, and so by making amends with Crystal, well, JP Stevens had to, do some cleanup too, because they're like all other companies and they do not want bad press. So even though the union had voted themselves in 1974, the workers voted for the union. It's now 1980. So Stevens hurried up and settled this contract with the workers. Now remember, Crystal was making $265 when she worked there. It's 6-7 years later. So the company, they increased the wages of the workers to $5 an hour. And then they also gave them like health benefits and sick days and stuff like that. So the campaign worked, but it was frustrating and it was long. So it's funny how a movie and a national speaking tour highlighting your bad conduct, will push your ass into action. But hey, it happened, right? It's funny how that works. So in 2007, Crystal developed meningioma. It's usually a benign form of cancer, but unfortunately for her, it was fatal. And her insurance company, actually refused to pay for the treatment for her and her medication. So she was in this big fight with them for years. And by the time they settled and said, okay, we're going to pay for this treatment, unfortunately, it was too late. And Crystal, she passed away in Burlington, North Carolina on September 11th of 2009. The movie Norma Ray continues to be used in labor studies classes, to kind of dramatize the difficulty of organizing under U.S. labor law. Actress Sally Field, when Crystal died, she said, "Portraying Crystal Lee in Norma Ray, however loosely based, not only elevated me as an actress, but as a human being." Crystal donated her papers, like her speeches and meeting notes. She donated it to Alamance Community College in North Carolina. She wanted, she said, I don't want my work to go to a big time university. I want it to go to some place where working class folks and poor people will have access to it. A year before she passed away, Crystal had did an interview with a Carolina newspaper and, in Burlington, and she was quoted as saying, "It is not necessary I be remembered as anything, but I would like to be remembered as a woman who deeply cared for the working poor and the poor people of the U.S. and the world." Now is the time where I give my flowers, because as you guys know, troublemakers, we do not wait for folks to retire. We do not wait for them to not be with us here anymore. We are going to show our appreciation right now. And I got an email from Travis Smith. Travis Smith is the president of AFSCME Local 2767 in Springfield, Illinois. And Travis writes, "This is not going to be a long story. However, I would like to talk about Zinnia Jackson. Zinnia is a new labor leader with AFSCME Local 2767. She was just elected as vice president and is rather new to the labor movement. Only a month into her new position, and she exudes a passion persona and is extremely eager to learn how to serve her members and to bring her local out of turmoil." Turmoil. That's some strong words, Travis, but I appreciate you, brother. And I'm sure Zinnia Jackson will too. So Zinnia, these are your flowers, girl. And if you would like to, give your flowers to a labor leader in your local, in your community, in your family, then write to us. Write to us at resolvedlaborpod@gmail.com. That's resolvedlaborpod@gmail.com. I would be honored to read one of your letters on the air on a future episode. So with that, don't forget to follow us, rate us, share us, Spotify, YouTube. As always, peace and solidarity. This week's episode of Resolved Labor Podcast is produced by The Create Place Studio. You can find them on all social media platforms at The Create Place STL. We Won is performed by Joe Jinks and written by John O'Connor. This has been Resolved Labor Podcast. As always, peace and solidarity.
Everybody come and join in the union. Begin. Stand together to overcome soon, and we win.